I'm here to tell you today that diabetes is usually reversible. When something like diabetes is almost 100% man-made. Oh, and I can hear some of my detractors out there screaming and screaming, crying foul on me here. But I said almost 100% man-made. We know there's a small genetic component. We know there are a few little minor factors that influence the equation. But by and large, diabetes is man-made. Therefore, it can be unmade. We simply remove the conditions under which diabetes arose, and we can reverse it almost all the time. So my primary message of this slide is right here in a single word: responsibility. So diabetes didn't just happen to you. All right. That's a good place to move on to the next concept, but I want you to keep that thought in mind. Diabetes is much more severe than you've probably been told. I liken it to a runaway freight train. Left unchanged, or if you make no changes in your lifestyle, diabetes will indeed get worse, and it is indeed progressive. One of those topics we talked about a few minutes ago. If you do nothing, it will get worse. I'm reminded of a movie some 20 to 30 years ago, The Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Many of you probably saw it. I want to jog your memory back to a particular scene when Lieutenant Reese comes back in time to work with Sarah Connor to try to stop the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he just shows up on the scene, and there's a scene where both of them in a car, and she tries to jump out of the car, and he grabs a hold of her shirt and holds her in the car, and she sinks her teeth into his hand, and he says, "Listen, cyborgs don't feel pain, but I do." She says, "Well, just let me go." And he turns to her and says, "Listen and understand. The Terminator's out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or pain or remorse. It simply will not stop until you are dead." That's what diabetes is. Diabetes is a Terminator. Doesn't care who you are, how old you are, where you live. If you change nothing, diabetes will take you out as surely as a Terminator. And if you watch the movie, you know that the Terminator was one bad dude. Diabetes is a bad dude. This is what feet begin to look like when we get neuropathy. We lose circulation in the extremities. This is where the neuropathy begins normally in the extremities, and this is some of the end results until actual toe and foot loss. No, diabetes is much more severe than you've probably been told. Reversing diabetes is much more psychological than physiological. We kind of hinted at this a few minutes ago when we talked about responsibility. The battle for your health, the battle against diabetes, will largely occur in your mind. If the only part of the battle for diabetes was physical, we could have type 2 diabetes licked tomorrow morning. Yeah, it's true. But diabetes is much more complicated than that, because much of what you will need to do to heal your body will take place from the neck up. It's more psychological than physiological. And it goes back to what we talked about before, not allowing yourself to believe that diabetes is a real disease over which you have no control. Absolutely incorrect. Of course you have control. If something is almost 100% man-made, it can be unmade. And that's our way out. That's our hope. It doesn't have to be the way that you have been told and probably been living. Because when you begin to make changes, your body will respond. Before we go into what it takes to turn your diabetes around, it's important for us to understand a little bit more of what diabetes is. Most people simply have no clue what this disorder is or how it develops. I want to give you just a real Cliff Note version of what it is. Diabetes is broken up into 5 stages. You see them outlined here on the left side of the slide. Stage 1 we may know more commonly as insulin resistance. Insulin resistance simply means that insulin, the hormone primarily responsible for lowering blood glucose, begins to lose its effectiveness. That means that A slight disorder has begun, but it's not manifest yet to the point where you know anything about it. But still the beginning is there. We call that stage 1. It's characterized by low blood insulin and low blood glucose. These are the healthy conditions. Stage 1, if you live a life like most people in the Western world, will eventually progress for most people to stage 2. As insulin resistance in stage 1 builds, we find the pancreas begins to compensate for that insulin resistance by producing more insulin to get the same job done. So we have rising blood insulin levels in stage 2, but there's still enough insulin there to overcome the insulin resistance, and our blood glucose remains low and normal. Again, if no conditions change, the normal Western lifestyle is continued to be lived. Stage 2 passes into stage 3, and here, this is where the honeymoon's over. Because through these 2 stages, 1 and 2, you've lived for years and decades. Kind of look at the pictures on the right side of the slide. You start with stage 1, everything's hunky-dory. Stage 2, well, your body's compensating, you don't really see anything going on. Stage 3 now, things begin to happen. Because you see, stage 1 and 2 has developed over decades. And finally, your pancreas is called upon to produce so much insulin that it finally reaches 100%. It can produce no more. And at that point, as the insulin resistance continues to build, your blood glucose begins to rise above normal for the first time. And this is where you're finally told, your doctor takes a test, you go in for a routine physical, whatever this case may be, and the blood glucose test or the glucose challenge test comes back and says, gee, I'm sorry, you're diabetic. Well, I'm here to tell you that this may be the first time you're clinically diagnosed diabetic, but you just now in stage 3. Stage 1 probably started in your late teens and early 20s. Yeah. Diabetes takes a long time to progress through these first 2 stages. But when it gets to stage 3, as I mentioned, the honeymoon's over. Things start to take a rising toll. Stage 3 continues to worsen and eventually gives way to stage 4. A big change occurs here because the body has been attacked through elevated levels of insulin for decades now. And insulin just is not a hormone that stands idly by and does nothing in your body once it reduces your blood glucose levels. No. An insulin level that's too high, or hyperinsulinemia as it's called, causes damage in your body. Insulin is a wonderful hormone if it's found in the body in the proper balance. But when it gets out of balance and we get elevated levels of insulin, some things begin to happen. You see, insulin triggers a set of biological sequences or a process to occur which ultimately leads to inflammatory response. And inflammation is at the root or basis of many of the modern day ills that we suffer from as a people, including rheumatoid arthritis. It's been linked to asthma, cancer, multiple sclerosis, a whole host of other things, psoriasis. So this high insulin is attacking your body all through stage 2, perhaps 20, 30 years or more. And let's not forget, insulin is called the fat storage hormone. That's what it does. So that gradual, slow but gradual weight gain that you've worried about and worked against through the decade of your 30s, 40s, into your 50s is occurring largely because insulin is at very high levels in your bloodstream, and the insulin is telling your body to take the glucose that comes into your bloodstream and store it as body fat. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Stage 3, now we have glucose beginning to rise. Stage 3 is characterized by very high blood insulin now as your pancreas is producing at 100%. Your glucose is starting to rise, so now glucose is beginning to attack your body from the other direction. We have damage to the very small blood vessels, the capillaries in your extremities, which prevents proper nutrition and health into your blood vessels, so we begin to get neuropathy, and the numbness, the tingling begins to set in.